patrons and subscribers, and YouTube bots who leave me such wonderful comments. I'm Random Rob, welcome back to the new show. Today we're going to look at Norman Jewison's 1975 dystopian classic, Rollerball. And as usual, I'm going to tell you 5 things you need to know about this violent and iconic early 70s film. But first, a little background. Rollerball was based on the short story Rollerball Murder by William Harrison, published in Esquire magazine in 1973. I'm including a link in the video description if you'd like to read the original story. It's short and brisk and still surprisingly modern. Harrison would end up writing the screenplay for the film as well. So it is one of those rare instances where the original author got to pen the screenplay and expand somewhat on the ideas in the original story. The film would be directed by Norman Jewison, who also produced the film. Jewison is a director with a storied career, producing and directing such hits as The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, The Thomas Crown Affair, In the Heat of the Night, Agnes of God, The Hurricane, and my personal favorite of his films, A Soldier's Story from 1984. A film about race relations between black and white soldiers at a southern military base nearing the end of World War II. If you have never seen it, I strongly recommend that film. So Jewison was no stranger to social commentary. So a film story about a dark future America where corporations held control over the masses with the bloody sport of rollerball seemed like something that would be right up his alley. But was it? Let's find out. So here are my 5 things. Number 1, the use of classical music. With the exception of the one corporate party scene in Rollerball, all of the music are mostly brooding, minor key pieces by composers like Bach and Shostakovich and Tchaikovsky, including the memorable Toccata in D minor by Bach, which opens the film. Jewison admitted he picked up this strategy from watching A Clockwork Orange, as well as borrowing some of the film techniques. The reason for classical music was this. If it's 1975 and you get current musicians to try to play futuristic music, it's gonna sound dated in about 5 minutes. Whereas if you play classical music, it would give the film more of a timeless quality, as well as suggesting century-old ideas about grace and nobility. Number 2, the pointless subplot. Although most of the events from the original short story do end up in the film, one thing that the short story did not have was an overarching narrative that you would need to expand that story to a feature-length film. In Rollerball, there is a rather uninteresting mystery plot where Jonathan E., played by James Caan, is trying to understand why the corporate overlords want him to retire from the game. And there are suggestions made throughout the film that Jonathan is becoming too powerful, that is, politically powerful. And this connects to a vague idea that Jonathan would or could somehow overthrow the rule of the corporations, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. Mainly because the only thing Jonathan E. knows is how to play rollerball. It's all he cares about, it's all he does. Choosing to continue playing rollerball even when he's being told not to is hardly an act of rebellion on the part of his character. He's just doing what he does. Within the system that he is a part of, he's essentially a slave. Refusing to play would be an act of rebellion if no one had been insisting that he retire. And viewed within the context of professional athleticism, the power that he has over the people seems kind of meaningless. While there are some professional athletes who went into politics after they retired, they're usually the exception, not the rule. Most professional athletes, especially football players, what happens after they retire? They usually end up becoming commentators or spokesmen for the sport, or they become owners of teams themselves. What I'm saying is, for most professional athletes, once you go in, it's like the CIA. You're in it for life if you live that long without suffering from concussions and all manner of bodily harm. Number 3, the tonality issue. This is why I mentioned earlier, did Norman Jewison succeed in making Rollerball the social commentary picture he wanted to make? Yes and no. Because from the get-go, there was one thing that needed to be perfect in order for it to work as a film, and that was that the game itself had to be completely believable and conveyed with every bit of technical sophistication that was popular in professional televised sports of the era. And what ended up happening, which Jewison did not intend, was that audiences really dug the violence in the movie. People were trying to buy the rights to the name so that they could create rollerball leagues. But times have changed. And although Rollerball was almost shockingly violent for the year that it came out, it's passing tame watching it now. But none of that takes away from what a fantastic job the film crew did creating the game of Rollerball. All of which was shot at the Munich Olympic Basketball Arena. The arena was located in the Munich Olympic Village, which was the site of the notorious Munich Massacre of 1972, where the Palestinian group Black September kidnapped and killed 11 members of the Israeli Olympic team and one West German police officer. Number 4, racism and illiteracy. One of the uncomfortable social artifacts of Rollerball is its depiction of the Japanese characters. And it's perhaps the one detail in the film that really feels out of place watching it now, in that we would imagine in the future world of 2018 that this film takes place in, that there would probably not still be American animosity towards the Japanese, but it's there in the film, Moon Pie calling the Japanese men pygmies, among a handful of things that date the movie, the one that I think dates it the most. Why is illiteracy important? While it's alluded to in a couple of scenes of Rollerball, it's much more clear in the story Rollerball Murder that television has completely replaced books. The only people who read anything anymore are the executive class. Literacy is reserved for them, while the ordinary citizens have to rely on the synopsized and digested information that they only get from the corporations through TV. And the irrelevancy of information to the average citizen is made clear in the scene where Jonathan Eve visits the supercomputer Zero and tries to ask it about how corporate decisions are made. And it's clear that the computer is schizophrenic and incapable of giving any useful answers. And number 5, the addictive power of the sports entertainment complex. What Rollerball is really about, and it's very clear when you read the original story, is Monday Night Football. Why was Monday Night Football so significant? Because TV was really hitting its stride in the early 70s, particularly in its coverage of professional sports. Sports coverage was no longer a cottage industry of independent sportscasters and cameramen sending footage to networks. It became, very rapidly, a gigantic industry, a sports entertainment industry that brought all the technical sophistication and power that television of the day had to bear. And as we learned from Marshall McLuhan's writings, the era of live TV was making the world smaller, tribalizing people, and destroying privacy. And so the amount of technical work and the amount of man-hours and sophistication that football was now being portrayed with in the early 70s seemed like an almost orgiastic extension of what McLuhan was talking about. There were questions in the media at the time. Is the sport too violent? Is the coverage too much? Is this amount of detail necessary? Those ideas are clearly reflected in Harrison's short story, and to a lesser degree in the film. It's also worth noting that the early 70s was also an era in a lot of cities in America and around the world where corporate complexes started to appear. These imposing steel and glass structures done in wild modern styles that definitely lent an imposing quality to the companies who built them. It was a time when a lot of Americans began to feel a separateness from corporations and the people who worked in them. Another film of this era that shows similar corporate implications would be the film The Parallax View. Who are corporations accountable to? Who owns them? Who controls them? Have they already taken over the government? And were they ethical? Following the party scene in the movie Rollerball, we see a group of executives go out in the early morning and take a modified Ruger .22 caliber target pistol, which I think is supposed to be a laser pistol, and use it to torch a bunch of trees, just for the fun of it. It's about as blunt a statement as you could possibly make in a film like this as to the character of the corporates, and yet it's still a striking and undeniably creepy sequence. And just a couple of points of trivia that I forgot to mention earlier. The cast and crew of Rollerball practiced the game constantly when they weren't shooting, partly to maintain the authenticity and partly because they just thought it was fun. And Rollerball would be one of the first movies where all the stunt people were listed in the credits. So does Rollerball 1975 hold up? Taken in context of what was going on at the time with media and sports entertainment and corporate power, yeah, I think it does. It's not the deepest movie, but the amount of detail and work they put into the game is still a masterclass in shooting and editing, and the lack of a soundtrack during the game sequences helps give it a striking documentary feel. The game is everything. So what are some of your favorite future sport films? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked what you heard, press the like button and subscribe. Alright, this is Random Rob for The New Show. I'll see you next time. Be excellent. Take care. The New Show is made possible by generous support from viewers like Tony, Luz, Arnell, Skipnick, Christopher, Marion, Eric, and B. Thank you so much for your support.